Hey guys, welcome back to One Shot Reviews. Now, this week I'm going to be reviewing Faust, Love of the Damned. This was released in 2000 and it was directed by Brian Yuzna. Now, Brian Yuzna is known as a huge producer in the horror genre for films such as Reanimator and From Beyond, along with so many other Lovecraftian movies. And he's also the director of Return of the Living Dead 3, all of the Reanimated sequels, along with the huge underground cult classic called Society. So you can kind of get an idea of what kind of movie this is going to be. It's also based on a comic book of the same name by Tim Vigil and David Quinn, the latter of which was also the co-screenwriter of this movie. So just in general form, this is like a superhero movie that is also a hybrid with a slasher movie, with a very gory aesthetic. Alright, so let's just jump into what this plot is about. It begins with a man named John Jaspers, who has these Wolverine-style gauntlets, and he's admitted to an asylum for killing some politically important people by Detective Dan Margolius, played by Jeffrey Combs. Now, Combs is a huge legend in the horror genre, playing the lead in such films as Reanimator and From Beyond. Dr. Jade DeCamp breaks through to John in this type of music therapy, and they start to form a connection. Now from there, we learn about John's past through some flashbacks. It shows a scene where his girlfriend is killed by some gangsters, and it's very poorly done. You can barely tell what's going on because of the editing, and the acting is way over the top. So after his girlfriend dies by gangsters, John agrees to sell his soul to a mysterious person named M, who is really just a stand-in for Mephistopheles, who is like the main antagonist from the Faust legend that this is based on. Now, M is played by Andrew Divoff, who is known for playing the Djinn in the first two Wishmaster movies, and he is also kind of like a B-level horror legend. John sells his soul, he gets these really cool gauntlets, and gets revenge on all the gangsters that killed his girlfriend. However, M is not done with him because, plot purposes. M starts to use him as a pawn to kill some more people for him, and after a while, John starts to become addicted to all that killing. Now, John is eventually buried alive for betraying him because he refused to continue the killing. But once he's buried alive, he gets strangled by a skeleton to some metal music, and comes back alive as the superhero Faust. I don't know if that's like some type of allegory for him defeating death, but let's just move along. Now, in order to show his trustworthy nature to Jade, who is obviously not on board with this new demon in front of her, he begins to gratuitously murder a bunch of police officers that are out to get her on a subway. And this leads to Jade trusting Faust, and they pretty much team up at this point. Now, meanwhile, the detective is trying to figure out M's plot and infiltrates his house, only to find some questionable things going on. So, he calls up Jade and says, "Hey, come alone to this place that is very mysterious, and I want to show you something cool." When she gets there, of course, the detective turns on her and is now a part of the plot, or maybe was part of the plot all along. I don't know, it's not really that clear. But anyways, Jade is now captured and starts to kind of be brainwashed in a way, and start to kind of give in to everything that M is believing in. And M is planning on using the cult in order to perform a ritual and use her as a sacrifice in order to regain all of his powers that he is starting to lose. So during the climax, Faustus shows right up and finds out that Jade is now kind of brainwashed and is totally okay with the ritual that's going on. M's cult begin to kill themselves, the detective sacrifices himself too, and the brainwashed Jane has sex with M, all about bringing a demon called Homunculus. Faust kills this demon, and M is defeated and agrees to release him of his contract, only for Faust then to turn back into John, and now that he doesn't have his healing powers, he begins to succumb to his injuries that he had while fighting the demon, and he dies in front of Jade. So it's a very bittersweet ending to a very darkly comedic movie. Let's get into some of the good things of this movie first. So, the soundtrack has some really late 90s, early 2000s metal, like Typo Negative, Fear Factory, Machine Head, a plethora of huge names band from the time. And then also, probably acting-wise, Divoff plays a really fun and over-the-top villain that is very entertaining to watch. Faust as a demon also is very dark, and even though he's cartoonish and has like this black comedic streak to him, he just has this really foreboding scariness, and the design of him is very good. Like, it's kind of low budget, but it really works in favor to kind of give this grimy and grungy atmosphere to all the scenes where Faust is there. Now, there are some cool things that Faust does too. Like, there's a part where he eats one of the people he kills hearts, and blood just shoots out the side once he takes a bite. And there's also a time when he severs a guy's head and then just kisses him on the lips. And then the final demon effects of the homunculus are actually really good. They're done practically, and I was very impressed for this movie that it had a really good like climax and monster at the very end. Now, just to name some other weird random Yuzna things that we see in this movie, it also features a mid-sex throat slitting, sacrificial tummy snakes, stomach teeth devouring a police commissioner, a woman's inflated boobs and butt becoming a gooey puddle, and all kinds of great things to see that you would expect from a Yuzna movie. Now, with all of the good out of the way, let's talk about the bad. So, the editing is very, very poor. It's clunky and disjointed, and sometimes it's very disorienting with its flashback snippets just kind of sprinkled in throughout, just like a random cut of something, and you're like, what did I just see? And it's disorienting. Now, also, it has occasionally very bad sound effects that are like straight out of a cartoon that really kind of take you out of this like cool, gritty, like dark movie. And I get that Faust is kind of like a cartoonish person in this movie, but I don't like those sound effects, and it really just takes you out of it. And also, some of the morph effects of Faust are done very badly when he goes from John to Faust. Because they're done like with this weird compositing CGI that really leaves a lot to be desired. Something practical just would have fit better. Also, Jeffrey Combs is like decent as a detective. He's not amazing, but his sudden shift to being a bad guy is very unearned and kind of breaks the flow of the plot. It's like, we know that we need to get him to be a bad guy. We're not going to show all the things that happen to cause it. We're just going to keep on trucking. And I don't like that at all. I really think it doesn't work. Now, along with all this, Jade, when she's possessed, is also very bad acting. When she's like normal, like for most of the movie, it's actually pretty good. I totally believe it. But once we get to the campy ending, she goes like full cartoon. Now, M also has an assistant named Claire who is in the movie a lot, but I didn't mention her a lot because she doesn't really do anything. She's very over-sexualized throughout the entire movie, and her only character traits are seduction and bondage. It just feels very exploitative. And lastly, for the bad, the whole thing feels like a bad ripoff of Spawn or The Crow. Now, even though Faust, the comic book, predated both The Crow and Spawn's comic books, this movie came out after The Crow and particularly Spawn, and you can really see how it just doesn't really become its own thing. It's kind of following these footsteps in a very low budget kind of way. It has like a special tone in a way with its cartooniness, but at the same time, it really just does not work. So let's talk about the ugly, the worst part of this movie that really keeps it from becoming any type of greatness. And it is the actor playing Faust. Now, he plays him both in his Faust form as well as his human form. As the superhero demon, it's pretty good. The cartooniness works. I love his acting. But in the human form, he is way over the top, somehow more cartoonish than Faust in his demon form, and he has so many exaggerated facial expressions that sometimes just takes you out of it. It's like, who makes a face like that? This is not a comic book panel. This is trying to be a movie. Do some realistic stuff for once. Also, he sometimes has an accent that goes away but then comes back, and I don't even know where that accent's from. He really just should have portrayed John Jaspers as a more brooding, serious man. So then when he makes a transition to Faust and is really cartoonish, it really kind of like is a bit of a shock, and like you kind of like see how he becomes a different man. By watching him in his human form be so over the top, it's like, oh, of course he's going to be an over the top demon because he's an over the top human. Now, I don't know if that is what he was like in the comic books. Maybe, maybe not. Whatever it is, I don't think it works in this movie. And it is by far what keeps this movie becoming what I wanted it to be. So how about the final verdict of Faust, Love of the Damned? It has some great effects, a solid-looking anti-hero, and a unique tone with its slasher-esque aesthetic. However, due to some shoddy editing, an incomprehensible plot, and some truly poor acting in very key roles, this movie is kept from becoming the guilty pleasure it should have been. It would have been better if it had like a tighter writing and maybe an improved budget a bit, but what we got really isn't all too recommendable unless you enjoyed like the Spawn movie or that kind of like niche early 2000s grittiness. There's a look to it that I know people enjoy. I wanted to enjoy this, but I didn't, and I know that there'll probably never be another Faust adaptation ever, which is alright. I would recommend maybe looking up the comic books. I have not seen them, but if you can find them for like a good price, there seems to be a good story there. It's just this movie does not represent it well. Now, DVDs for it are pretty expensive, but you can watch it for free on YouTube as of this filming. That does it for this one-shot review. Tune in next month as I tackle another horror movie or possible horror series and just give you my lowdown of the good, the bad, and the ugly.